type of alcoholic beverage is beer. We've known that it's been around for about 10,000 years, so beer is very popular. It's made from grains, usually barley, but sometimes it can be made from wheat. Blue Moon, I think, is a wheat beer. There's a bunch of wheat beers out there, which have been allowed to sprout and then crush and fermented with hops and yeast. Who came up with this idea of doing this? I have no idea. Ale has about 5 to 6% alcohol in it. Stout and Guinness are another type of beer. Porter is another type of beer. These aren't all that popular in the United States. Malt liquor is relatively popular in the United States. It's got 6 to 9% beer in or alcohol in it. An example of malt liquor would be Colt 45, Mickey's malt liquor, and Old English 800, which is they're all ale or malt liquors. The most popular beer in the United States is probably lager beer. Lager beer has between 3.2% and 5% beer alcohol in it. All the more popular beers, Budweiser, Coors, and Miller, are all lager beers. If you're not a beer drinker, none of this makes any sense. But if you are a beer drinker, then this makes a lot of sense. Oh, it's a bock. You can't drink that beer. It's a bock. Most of the bocks are darker beers. Hudipol, Schädling, Michelob, Amber Bock. They're all bock beers, and they have about the same amount of alcohol, right around 5% alcohol content. Most of the beer companies in the United States are not owned by Americans. I think Coors is the last one. Miller's is owned by a Canadian company, and Budweiser is owned by a Belgian company. Budweiser is the largest beer producer in the United States. As interesting as that is. Okay, so that's beer. Wine is a fermented beverage from a fruit or from a grain. Most people think it just comes from grapes, but the reality is it can come from peaches or plums. It can also be made. You can also make rice wine. Rice wine is sake, the Japanese sake. We don't usually make rice wine in the United States, but it's very popular in Japan, of course. American wines tend to be stronger than European wines. This is a shock to most people. American wines have between 12 to 14% alcohol in them. European wines have between 8 and 12% alcohol in them. Fortified wines have alcohol added. They usually have between 17 and 21% alcohol. Wine coolers contain juices which dilute out the alcohol content, and they tend to have around 6%. For the longest time, well, not for the longest time, back in the 80s and 90s, wine coolers were real popular, not so much anymore. Distilled spirits are alcoholic beverages that go through a distillation process, concentrating the substance into ethyl alcohol. These spirits are almost always stronger than beer or wine. When this process was developed in Europe, the number of alcoholics on the continent exploded. When the immigrants came to the United States, of course, when the people from Europe first came over here, they realized that transporting their grain as alcohol was a lot cheaper and a lot more efficient than trying to transport the grain. So the people that grew sugar turned it into rum, and the people that grew corn turned it into whiskey. The Whiskey Rebellion, the famous Whiskey Rebellion that occurred right after the Revolutionary War, had to do with those individuals they were trying to charge them a tariff on their whiskey. It was the only way that they could transport their grain was by converting it into whiskey and then transporting it, and the United States government tried to tax them, and they were all upset about that. These were farmers in western Pennsylvania, and of course George Washington put together an army, and they put down the Whiskey Rebellion, the famous Whiskey Rebellion. Alcoholism has been very high in the United States since colonial days, but then of course it was cut off during Prohibition, and of course that makes the difference between the U.S. and Canada. Europeans tend to drink much more alcohol than the people in the United States. Americans drink 95 liters of beer per capita and 20 liters of wine. If nobody in this room drinks beer, then that means our beer goes to somebody else, because this is a per capita figure. So there are people that drink a lot of beer, a lot more than 90 gallons. 90 liters, I'm sorry. A liter is a little bit larger than a quart. Anyway, okay, so that's in the United States. As you can see, Germans drink a lot more beer than we do. They drink 131 liters of beer per capita and 22 liters of wine. German women don't drink as much alcohol as the American women do. The German men drink a lot of beer, just a lot of beer. Brits drink 103 liters of beer per capita and 13 liters of wine. The French drink 40 liters of beer per capita and 60 liters of wine. The Italians are number one. They drink 103 liters of beer and 59 liters of wine per capita per year. I was stationed in Germany. I decided I was going to buy a German shooting shirt, sweater. It had a pad on the shoulder so you could put your weapon against your shoulder. Anyway, I decided I was going to buy a German shooting shirt. So I went out and I got a large shirt. It fit me in the shoulders and fit me in the chest. But came down to my knees, and I thought, well, that's the silliest thing in the world. Why in the world would they make a sweater so big? Do they have such big butts? No, that wasn't the answer. The reason was because they had such big beer bellies, because they're Germans. Germans drink a lot of beer. And of course, I was flat stomach because I didn't drink beer. And I had a sweater that went all the way down to my knees. I gave it to my wife. She wore it as a dress because, well, it was long enough for a dress anyway. I thought it was kind of interesting. Didn't fit her in the shoulder, but it fit her in the chest. So that's kind of nice. Wait a minute. This isn't. Alcohol is absorbed all along the gastrointestinal tract, the stomach, the small intestines, the colon. In men, 10 to 20% of the alcohol is absorbed by the stomach, whereas women absorb no alcohol in their stomachs at all. So it's not fair. Women don't have as much alcohol dehydrogenase in their stomach, but men do. So men get drunk a lot slower than women do. They tend to get drunk a lot slower than women do. Most of the men's alcohol and almost all of the women's alcohol is absorbed through capillaries in the walls of the small intestines. Because of the different processing of alcohol for males and females, a woman who consumes the same amount of alcohol and weighs the same amount as a man will still maintain about 30% more alcohol in her bloodstream than he does. So women should never try to match drinks with men. If they do, they're going to get drunk, and they're going to get drunk a lot faster than he is. He's going to stay sober and she's going to be snockered. And then what happens? Well, hopefully nothing.
Yeah, right.
I hope nothing happens, but he hopes something happens. I'm sure he hopes something.
He's not gonna hope, he's gonna force it.
You can't force
Or
somebody.
she.
Women have a greater problem than men because women have a lower percentage of body water to dilute the alcohol. Women tend to be smaller than men. Women have more body fat than men do. Men have more muscle mass, and muscle mass contains more water. Women have less alcohol dehydrogenase in their stomachs, as I said before. Women's hormonal fluctuations can make them more or less susceptible to alcohol's effect. So when a woman is ovulating, she's more susceptible to getting drunk, as sad as that sounds. Women absorb more alcohol during their premenstrual period than any other time during their cycles. Alcohol does greater damage to women than it does to men. Female alcoholics have death rates 50 to 100% higher than the male alcoholic death rates. The alcohol that is absorbed into the bloodstream is partially metabolized by the liver. The alcohol that is not metabolized by the liver moves easily through the capillary walls and can enter any organ or tissue because the molecules are very small. Alcohol molecules tend to be relatively small. They're also water soluble, and they are also lipid soluble. In other words, they're fat soluble. Alcohol will readily cross the placental barrier and pass into the fetus bloodstream. One of the problems with drinking alcohol is that it gets into your brain so readily. The reason it gets into your brain is because, for one thing, the molecules are small and your brain tissue is fat. Your brain tissue is very lipophilic. It's very, it has a lot of fat in it. That's why brains are probably the richest food that you can eat, because of the fat content of the brain. So it gets into the brain very readily. And of course, as we have already described, when you start drinking alcohol, it goes right to your prefrontal lobe, the reasoning section of your brain. It anesthetizes that first, and then it walks its way back through your brain. After imbibing, the individual will have the highest concentration of alcohol about 60 to 90 minutes after their last drink. It takes it that long. It takes about 20 minutes for your stomach to empty, and then most of the alcohol, if you remember, is metabolized. It is taken in through your capillaries in your small intestines. So it takes about 60 to 90 minutes. So if you're dealing with somebody who has been drinking, it's going to get worse. If they had just had their 15th beer, you've got about an hour and a half before it's really going to hit them really hard. So you got a problem. You got to wait for an hour and a half before. And if they're really close to passing out when they drink that last beer, they're going to pass out somewhere between 60 and 90 minutes. It's a mess. It is such a mess. And it can get worse than that. One time I was, we were collecting a drug urine on this guy. And he was drunk, and they were wondering if he had taken any, shot up with any opiates or snorted any cocaine. So we were going to do a drug urine on the guy, and he couldn't urinate. So we took him into the bathroom, and we tried to get him to pee, and he wouldn't pee. So the cop that brought him in said, "Here, I'll give him a glass of water." And I wasn't thinking, I was doing something else, and he gave him a glass of water, and I go, "Oh my God, no, that's the last thing you need to do." Because what happened was, when that water got down into his stomach, it sucked some of the alcohol out of his stomach lining. So it pulled it out of his stomach lining. And as he started digesting that stuff, he got drunker and drunker and drunker. Finally, he passed out. And it was because of the water that he drank. Anyway, he passed out, and he was in the bathroom. He was trying to go to the bathroom, and he collapsed, and he hit his head on a urinal, busted the urinal. It was a mess. It was such a mess. And he still never didn't collect his drug urine. But he did pass out, and we took him up to the emergency room, and he had this horrible bruise on his forehead, this horrible cut on his forehead from hitting the urinal. Rate of absorption determines the degrees of effects, which can be influenced by your body weight, by your body fat content, by your body chemistry, by your emotional state, your health status, the temperature, and the barometric pressure outside. So all of this stuff has to do with how fast or how slow you get drunk. Absorption and drunkenness can be increased by increasing the volume of the rate of drinking. The faster you drink, the faster you're going to get drunk, the more likely you are to get drunk. If you drink on an empty stomach, of course, there's nothing diluting out the alcohol, so you'll get drunk faster. Using high alcohol percentage drinks, in other words, if you drink a shot of tequila or if you're drinking shots, you're going to get drunk a lot faster than if you're drinking beers. Remember, beer is 3.2 to 5%. Lager beer is anyway. If you're drinking tequila shots, they're what, 70, 80, 90% alcohol. If you're drinking vodka shots, those are even stronger. Drinking carbonated beverages, it moves it into your system faster. So if you're drinking champagne, you're going to get drunk faster. If you're drinking alcohol with tonic water, or if you're drinking a rum and coke, those are all carbonated beverages, and they move the alcohol into your system much more readily. If you drink warm alcohol, of course we don't do that in the United States very much. I can't think of a drink that we warm up, but in Japan they always drink their sake warm, and of course it gets into your system really fast. You can slow absorption or lessen the effects of alcohol by eating before or while drinking. The fattier the foods, the less likely you are to get drunk. So if you eat meats, or if you eat milk or drink milk, eat cheese with your alcohol, or eat any fatty foods, you're less likely to get drunk. You can dilute the drink with ice water or juice. Screwdriver is not as screwdriver is vodka and orange juice. It's not as you won't get as drunk as readily on on a screwdriver as you will on a shot of vodka or a shot of gin or whatever it is that you're drinking. Same way with Bloody Marys. 2 to 10% of the alcohol will be excreted before metabolism occurs. The remaining 90 to 98% of the alcohol is metabolized through oxidation by the liver and excreted through the kidneys and the lungs. And of course you can smell it. If somebody's been drinking, you can smell it. If you guys have been drinking, I could smell it here. I know, so I know you. And that was a problem with going into the emergency room at night. You knew that the guys were drunk, and you knew that you're going to get hit by a wall of alcohol as soon as you walked into the room. And sometimes vomit, which is always fun as well.
As soon as you walk into ER.
Yeah, exactly. Hit by the wall. In order of oxidation, the alcohol turns into acetaldehyde. Wait a minute. The alcohol is turned into acetaldehyde by alcohol dehydrogenase, and it turns into acetaldehyde. The acetaldehyde is turned into acetic acid by the acetaldehyde dehydrogenase. The acetic acid is turned into carbon dioxide and water by oxygen. Acetaldehyde is a substance that resembles formaldehyde and is very toxic to the liver. If you've ever been to Vietnam, they put formaldehyde in their beer. It gives it a better taste. They think anyway, as odd as that may seem. It has been speculated that American Indians may have a high alcoholism rate and advanced cirrhosis because of disruptions of the acetaldehyde dehydrogenase and the alcohol dehydrogenase in their systems. This, along with the binge pattern of drinking, increases the likelihood of an unfortunate outcome for drinking with American Indians. The reality is that the pattern of drinking on most reservations is pretty much the same. They abstain through the week and then they get drunk on the weekend. So they tend to binge drink. When they drink everything that they've got. So if they've got a case of beer, they drink the whole case. That's usually the way it works. Moderation doesn't seem to be part of the pattern. So it's actually the pattern of drinking that they use, which is kind of tragic if you think about it. So is there a gene that makes American Indians more likely to have problems with alcohol? No. We haven't found it. But American Indians do tend to have a problem. Now the reality is, and we've done studies up in Montana, in the Northwest, what we've discovered is that white people drink a lot more than Indians do. But their pattern of drinking is completely different. They tend to drink in moderation, so they drink all through the week rather than just on the weekends. If they've got beer in the refrigerator, they'll drink a couple of beers every night. It's that pattern of drinking. Normally, they tend to be more solitary drinkers, so they drink by themselves. American Indians tend to drink in groups, so it's a communal thing. That seems to be what we are seeing as far as American Indians are concerned. I have no idea where I got this picture. This is a lady from Peru, and that's John Belushi drinking. That's from Animal House. I have no idea why they put the two pictures together, or why they put him in front of her. He's not really an American. He's not an American Indian. The Belushis are Albanian. They were Albanians. Individuals may use home remedies to keep from getting drunk. Aspirin inhibits metabolism of alcohol, and when used as a prophylactic to lessen the possibility of a hangover, actually causes the individual to become drunk faster. And I told you the story of the nurse that I used to It wasn't in here, was it? It was in another class. I'll tell Johnny. I used to date this nurse, and her idea was she drank a lot, which she didn't drink a lot around me because I didn't drink at all. But when she drank, she would take aspirin before she drank. She would drink so that she wouldn't have a hangover. She had a problem with hangovers. And she'd do this like every night. She would drink. She would take an aspirin and she would drink a couple of